You think rice in black households was just a plain side dish? Think again. African American mothers in the 1960s transformed this humble grain into centerpiece meals that had children racing to the table. Here are 30 cheap rice dishes black mothers made that 1960s kids begged for. Red rice with smoked sausage was the kind of dish that announced itself the moment you walked through the door, its tomato-rich aroma filling every corner of the kitchen. African American mothers learned this recipe from gulagishi traditions, where rice was king and nothing went to waste. Long grain rice was sauteed with onions, bell peppers, and garlic, then simmered in crushed tomatoes seasoned with paprika and cayenne. Sliced smoked sausage was stirred in during the final minutes, its rendered fat adding richness to every grain. The dish was economical and filling, stretching a single link of sausage across a pot that fed 6 children. Served straight from the cast iron skillet, this rice carried the warmth of Sunday afternoons. Children scraped their bowls clean, hoping for seconds before siblings could claim them. Rice and gravy was the ultimate weeknight rescue, a dish that turned leftover pan drippings into liquid gold poured over fluffy white rice. Black mothers knew nothing should be wasted after frying pork chops or chicken, so they added flour to the pan and stirred until browned. Milk or water was whisked in slowly, creating thick, savory gravy that bubbled while the rice steamed nearby. The combination was simple but satisfying, offering protein-rich flavor without requiring another piece of meat. Children loved how the gravy soaked into each grain, turning plain rice into something rich and comforting. This dish represented the resourcefulness of African American kitchens, where flavor was built from what others might discard. It was frugal cooking at its finest, proving that ingenuity mattered more than expensive ingredients. Tomato rice carried the bright tang of canned tomatoes mixed into fluffy grains, a dish that children either loved immediately or grew to crave. Mothers would saute onions in bacon grease until soft, then add canned tomatoes and let them break down into a fragrant sauce. Rice was stirred in and cooked slowly, absorbing every drop of that tangy, sweet liquid until each grain turned a beautiful sunset orange. Some families added sugar to balance acidity, while others preferred natural sharpness that cut through heavier dishes. It was often served alongside fried fish or pork chops, but children happily ate bowls of it alone. Tomato rice was inexpensive, using pantry staples that cost pennies but delivered comfort worth far more. This dish taught children that simple ingredients created memorable meals. Hoppin John rice was more than food in African American households. It was tradition, luck, and heritage served in a single pot. Black-eyed peas simmered with ham hocks or bacon until tender, their cooking liquid becoming a rich, smoky broth. Rice was added directly to the pot, absorbing those flavors as it cooked until each grain was infused with the essence of pork and pepper. Mothers made this dish on New Year's Day for prosperity, but children begged for it year-round because the taste was simply irresistible. The peas were believed to represent coins, bringing fortune to those who ate them, but the real treasure was the flavor itself. Served with cornbread on the side, this was a complete meal that cost almost nothing to prepare. Hoppin John connected generations, carrying recipes passed down through oral tradition. Butter rice with fried eggs was breakfast, lunch, and dinner, depending on what the family needed and what the pantry held. Mothers would cook rice until fluffy, then stir in generous amounts of butter until each grain glistened and carried that rich, creamy flavor. A fried egg was placed. On top is runny yolk breaking open to create a natural sauce that children mixed eagerly into the rice below. Some mothers added a splash of soy sauce or a sprinkle of black pepper for extra depth. This dish was the answer when money was tight but bellies needed filling, providing protein and carbohydrates in one inexpensive bowl. Children loved the ritual of breaking the yolk themselves, watching it flow golden across the butter-slicked grains. It was honest, humble food that required no pretense but delivered complete satisfaction. Dirty rice earned its name from the ground meat and chicken livers that gave it a speckled, earthy appearance no child could resist. Mothers would brown ground beef or pork with finely chopped livers, onions, celery, and bell peppers until the mixture was deeply savory. Rice was cooked separately, then folded into the meat mixture with Cajun seasonings that brought gentle heat and bold flavor. The dish stretched a small amount of meat across a large pot, making it economical enough for weekly suppers. Children who claimed to hate liver never suspected it was hidden in every delicious bite, and mothers kept that secret with knowing smiles. Dirty rice was Cajun tradition, adopted and adapted by Black families throughout Louisiana and beyond. It proved that the best flavors often came from the humblest ingredients. Rice pudding for breakfast was a sweet morning treat that turned last night's leftover rice into something children woke up excited to eat. Mothers would warm the rice in a pot with milk, sugar, cinnamon, and a touch of vanilla until it became creamy and fragrant. Some added raisins or a pat of butter, stirring until everything melted together into comfort. The pudding was served warm in bowls, sometimes with an extra drizzle of condensed milk for families who could afford the luxury. Children loved that something as ordinary as leftover rice could be transformed into dessert they were allowed to eat before school. This dish embodied the African American philosophy of wasting nothing and finding joy in reinvention. It was practical magic, turning yesterday's side dish into today's beloved breakfast. Salmon croquettes over rice was Friday supper in countless Black households, a tradition born from Catholic neighbors and adopted for its economy. Canned salmon was mashed with eggs, onions, and crushed crackers, then formed into patties and fried until golden and crispy. These croquettes were placed atop mounds of fluffy white rice, their juices soaking into the grains below. Mothers stretched a single can of salmon into enough patties to feed an entire family, making it one of the most affordable protein sources available. Children loved the crispy exterior, giving way to tender, flavorful fish, especially when hot sauce was passed around the table. The dish connected families to coastal foodways and the resourcefulness of making canned goods. Feel homemade? This was frugal cooking that never tasted cheap. Rice and kidney beans was a hearty one-pot meal that filled bellies and stretched budgets further than seemed possible. Dried kidney beans were soaked overnight, then simmered with ham hocks, onions, garlic, and bay leaves until they became creamy and rich. Rice was served alongside or stirred directly into the beans, creating a complete protein that nutritionists would later praise, but mothers already understood. The dish was seasoned with cayenne and thyme, giving it warmth that radiated from the inside out. Children would eat multiple bowls, not realizing they were consuming one of the healthiest and most economical meals their mothers could provide. Louisiana traditions heavily influenced this dish, but it appeared in Black kitchens across the entire South. Rice and kidney beans proved that poverty could never diminish flavor or love. Smothered chicken and rice was Sunday dinner, magic, transforming tough chicken pieces into fork-tender meat swimming in rich onion gravy. Mothers would season chicken legs and thighs generously, brown them in hot oil, then remove them while sliced onions softened in the drippings. The chicken returned to the pot covered with those caramelized onions and enough water or broth to create steam. Hours of slow cooking later, the meat fell from the bone and the gravy had thickened into something silky and deeply savory. Rice was piled on plates first, then topped with chicken and generous ladles of that precious gravy. Children fought over the pieces, with the most onions clinging to them. This dish was love made visible, requiring time and attention that showed how much mothers cared. Fried rice with leftover vegetables was the dish that proved nothing in a black mother's kitchen ever went to waste. Yesterday's peas, carrots, corn, or green beans found new life when tossed into a hot skillet with day-old rice and a splash of oil. Mothers would scramble eggs directly into the mixture, adding soy sauce or Worcestershire for that savory depth children craved. The rice needed to be cold and slightly dry, which made leftovers perfect for the job. Each grain fried separately, picking up the flavors of whatever vegetables the week had left behind. Children never complained about eating their vegetables when they came disguised in fried rice. This dish taught families that creativity could transform scraps into something everyone requested by name. Rice with neck bones was a dish that required patience, but rewarded families with flavor that expensive cuts could never match. Pork neck bones were seasoned heavily with salt, pepper, and garlic, then browned in a Dutch oven before being covered with water and left to simmer for hours. The meat slowly fell away from the bones, while the cooking liquid became a rich, gelatinous broth that glistened in the light. Rice was cooked in same Potlikker, absorbing every bit of smoky, porky goodness until the grains turned golden and fragrant. Children learned to navigate around the small bones, savoring the tender meat that clung to them. Neck bones cost almost nothing at the butcher, making this dish accessible even during the leanest weeks. It was proof that the best flavors came from parts others overlooked. Shrimp and rice stretched a coastal bounty into meals that fed entire families on what others might consider a single serving. When shrimp was affordable or caught fresh from nearby waters, mothers would saute them with onions, garlic, and bell peppers until pink and fragrant. The shrimp were nestled atop beds of seasoned rice, their juices mingling with the grains below. Some mothers made a tomato-based sauce, while others kept it simple with butter and Cajun spices. Children felt fancy eating shrimp, not realizing their mothers had made a pound stretch across 6 plates. This dish connected African-American families to Gula traditions and the abundant seafood of southern coastlines. It was celebration food that didn't require a celebration to appear on the table. Rice and butter beans carried the creamy sweetness that made children ask for seconds without being told to finish their vegetables. Lima beans, called butter beans throughout the South, were simmered until they turned soft and almost melted on the tongue. Ham hocks or bacon added smokiness to the cooking liquid, which became a velvety broth perfect for spooning over rice. The combination was filling and nutritious, stretching a small amount of meat into a complete meal. Children who claimed to hate beans often loved butter beans because of their mild, almost sweet flavor. Mothers knew this dish would disappear from the pot before the night was over. It represented the quiet genius of Southern cooking, where humble ingredients became something everyone craved. Oxtail. Rice was the dish that transformed what butchers once gave away into a delicacy children would remember forever. Oxtails were browned until caramelized, then braised for hours with onions, garlic, thyme, and allspice until the meat surrendered from the bone. The cooking liquid reduced into a rich, sticky gravy that clung to every surface it touched. Rice was served as the foundation, soaking up that precious sauce while tender pieces of oxtail were arranged on top. The dish required time that working mothers didn't always have, making it special occasion food in many households. Children learned patience, waiting for oxtails, understanding that the best things couldn't be rushed. This was comfort food elevated to art through nothing but time and care. Pepper steak over rice brought a touch of the exotic to Black dinner tables, adapting Chinese restaurant flavors to home kitchens. Inexpensive beef was sliced thin against the grain, then stir-fried with bell peppers, onions, and tomatoes in a hot skillet. Soy sauce and a little sugar created a glossy sauce that coated everything in savory sweetness. The mixture was spooned over mounds of steaming white rice, the grains catching every drop of that flavorful liquid. Children who had never been to a Chinese restaurant thought their mothers had invented something entirely new. The dish stretched a small amount of beef across multiple plates, making it economical despite feeling special. It proved that Black mothers could master any cuisine and make it their own. Rice with fried fish and hot sauce was Saturday supper that brought the whole family to the kitchen before the cooking was even done. Whiting, croaker, or catfish was seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, then dredged in cornmeal and fried until the coating crackled. The fish was placed directly on beds of white rice where the crust stayed crispy while the juices flavored the grains beneath. Hot sauce was passed around the table, each family member adding their preferred amount of heat. This dish cost almost nothing when fish was caught rather than bought, making it a staple in communities near rivers and coastlines. Children grew up associating the smell of frying fish with weekend freedom. It was simple food that carried the taste of home. Crowder peas and rice was a dish that Southern children either loved from the first bite or learned to appreciate with time. These small brownish peas were simmered slowly with fatback or ham hocks until they released their natural starch and created a thick pot liquor. The liquid turned almost creamy, coating each pea in silky richness that rice absorbed eagerly. Mothers seasoned the pot with onions, garlic, and black pepper, letting flavors meld during the long cooking process. Unlike black-eyed peas, Crowder peas had an earthier, more robust flavor that stood up to heavy seasoning. Children who grew up eating them developed a taste for this unique variety. The dish represented agricultural traditions passed down through generations of Black Southern farmers. Rice with stewed tomatoes and okra brought together two beloved garden staples into one pot of pure Southern comfort that tasted like summer itself. Fresh okra was sliced and sautéed until the slippery texture mellowed, then combined with canned or fresh tomatoes and simmered until thick and fragrant. The mixture was served over fluffy rice, the grains soaking up the tangy, slightly sweet sauce, while okra added body and satisfying texture. Some mothers added shrimp or sausage when budgets allowed, transforming it into a heartier meal that could stretch even further. Children learned to love okra through this dish, its unusual texture hidden beneath the familiar comfort of tomatoes and seasoned rice. It was summer in a bowl when gardens overflowed with abundance. This recipe connected families to the land that sustained them. Time one's ham and rice. Casserole turned Sunday's leftover ham into Monday's complete dinner with minimal effort and maximum flavor that no one would refuse. Cubed ham was mixed with cooked rice, cream of mushroom soup, and whatever cheese the refrigerator held, creating a mixture that promised comfort in every bite. The mixture was poured into a baking dish, topped with breadcrumbs or crushed crackers, and baked until bubbling and golden brown on top. Children loved the creamy texture and the way the ham's saltiness played against the mild rice beneath. Mothers loved that it used up leftovers while creating something entirely new that everyone would eat without complaint. The casserole could be assembled ahead of time, making it perfect for busy weeknights when time was short. It represented the practical magic of turning remnants into meals. Giblet rice was the dish that proved nothing from the chicken went to waste in a black mother's kitchen. The heart, liver, gizzard, and neck were simmered in seasoned water until tender, then chopped fine and folded into rice, cooked in that same flavorful broth. The result was earthy, rich, and deeply satisfying, with each bite carrying the concentrated essence of poultry. Mothers often made this on days when whole chickens were broken down for other meals, ensuring every scrap contributed to feeding the family. Children who might have turned their noses up at organ meats ate giblet rice without complaint because the flavors melded so completely. The dish appeared at Thanksgiving tables alongside the turkey, honoring traditions that stretch back generations. Giblet rice was resourcefulness transformed into something genuinely delicious. Rice with smoked turkey wings delivered deep, smoky flavor without the expense of ham or bacon that other dishes required. Turkey wings were seasoned and roasted or simmered until the meat fell from the bone, their cooking liquid becoming a rich broth. Rice was cooked in that smoky liquid, absorbing every bit of flavor while the shredded meat was stirred back in. The dish was especially popular during the holidays when smoked turkey parts appeared in grocery stores at affordable prices. Children loved the tender meat hiding among the grains, each forkful a treasure hunt of smoky goodness. Mothers appreciated that turkey wings stretched further than other meats while delivering just as much satisfaction. This was comfort food that felt special without requiring a special occasion. Pigeon peas and rice carried Caribbean influence into African American kitchens, connecting families to island traditions and tropical flavors. The small round peas were simmered with coconut milk, thyme, Scotch bonnet pepper, and garlic until tender and fragrant. Rice was added directly to the pot, cooking in that aromatic liquid until each grain was infused with creamy coconut richness. Some mothers added salt pork or bacon for extra depth, while others kept it vegetarian when meat was scarce. Children loved the subtle sweetness that coconut brought to the dish, making it feel almost exotic compared to everyday rice and beans. The recipe traveled north during the Great Migration, carried by families from Florida and coastal communities. Pigeon peas and rice proved that Black cuisine was never limited by geography. Rice and cabbage was the dish that stretched pennies into meals when nothing else seemed possible. A head of cabbage cost almost nothing and could feed an entire family when shredded and sautéed with onions, garlic, and a little bacon grease. The softened cabbage was folded into cooked rice, creating a dish that was filling, nutritious, and surprisingly flavorful. Some mothers added smoked sausage or ham when available, but the dish stood on its own even without meat. Children learned to appreciate cabbage through this preparation, its sweetness emerging during the jipsotu slow cooking process. The combination provided both carbohydrates and vegetables in one economical bowl. Rice and cabbage represented survival cooking that never sacrificed taste for thrift. Liver and onions over rice transformed an ingredient many children feared into something they actually requested at dinner. Beef or pork liver was sliced thin, soaked in milk to remove bitterness, then dredged in seasoned flour and fried until just cooked through. Mountains of sliced onions were caramelized in the same pan, their sweetness balancing the liver's mineral richness. Everything was served over rice that soaked up the pan juices and onion-flavored drippings. Mothers knew liver was one of the most nutritious and affordable proteins available, packed with iron that growing children needed. The key was never overcooking it, which made the texture tough and the flavor overwhelming. Children who grew up eating it this way developed appreciation for organ meats. Thyme, chitterlings rice with canned mackerel was pantry cooking at its most practical, turning shelf-stable fish into a complete weeknight dinner. The mackerel was drained and flaked, then sautéed with onions, tomatoes, and peppers until heated through and fragrant. This mixture was served over rice, the fish's natural oils adding richness to every grain beneath. Mothers kept cans of mackerel stocked for emergencies, knowing they could produce dinner in minutes when nothing else was available. The fish had a stronger flavor than canned tuna, which children either loved or learned to tolerate. Hot sauce helped bridge the gap for picky eaters, cutting through the fishiness with welcome heat. Rice with canned mackerel proved that good cooking meant being prepared for any situation. Sausage and rice skillet was the one-pot wonder that appeared on weeknight tables when time was short, but appetites were large and demanding. Sliced smoked sausage was browned in a cast iron. Skillet until the edges crisped and the rendered fat pooled in the pan. Onions, peppers, and garlic joined next, softening in those flavorful drippings before rice and seasoned broth were added to complete the dish. Everything simmered together until the rice absorbed the liquid and the flavors melded into something greater than the sum of their parts. Children gathered around as the lid came off, the steam carrying promises of the satisfying meal to come. This dish required only one pan to wash, which mothers deeply appreciated after long days of work. Sausage and rice skillet was proof that simple could still be spectacular. Rice with chitterlings was a dish that divided families, but united those who loved it with passionate devotion. Chitterlings, cleaned and simmered for hours until tender, were chopped and served over rice with their cooking liquid spooned on top. The flavor was intense, earthy, and unmistakably pork, carrying traditions that stretch back to slavery when nothing could be wasted. Mothers who prepared chitterlings did so with care, understanding both the cultural significance and the patience required. Children either developed a taste for them early or avoided them entirely, with little middle ground. The rice absorbed the rich porky broths, making each grain flavorful and satisfying. Rice with chitterlings represented heritage that some families refused to let fade away. Sweet rice with cinnamon was the breakfast or dessert that felt like a warm hug on cold mornings when comfort was needed most. Cooked rice was warmed in a pot with milk, butter, sugar, and generous amounts of cinnamon until it became creamy, fragrant, and impossible to resist. Some mothers added raisins or a drizzle of condensed milk for extra sweetness and richness that children absolutely adored. The dish was simple enough for children to make themselves once they were old enough to use the stove safely. It used a leftover rice that might otherwise be thrown away, transforming it into something eagerly anticipated the next morning. Sweet rice appeared on tables when money was tight, but comfort was needed most. This dish proved that sweetness didn't require expensive ingredients. Rice and ground beef casserole was the weeknight savior that fed families affordably while delivering flavors children loved. Ground beef was browned with onions and garlic, then combined with rice, canned tomatoes, and whatever seasonings the pantry held. The mixture was poured into a baking dish, topped with cheese if available, and baked until bubbling and golden around the edges. Children loved the familiar flavors and the way the cheese stretched when they dug in their forks. Mothers loved their 1 pound of beef could feed 6 or more when stretched with rice and vegetables. The casserole could be assembled ahead and baked when dinner time arrived, making busy evenings manageable. This dish represented the practical genius of making little go far.
Chitlin's holiday feast once marked winter celebrations with an aroma as unforgettable as the labor required to prepare it. Hog intestines were cleaned thoroughly, then simmered for hours with onions, vinegar, and spices until tender. The dish demanded patience and community, often bringing families together for a full day of washing and cooking. Served with hot sauce and cornbread, chitlins carried the history of using every part of the animal, a practice born of necessity during slavery and carried forward as a mark of resilience. Despite the strong scent that filled kitchens and neighborhoods, the feast represented abundance and pride, especially during Christmas and New Year gatherings. Elders spoke of the old days while younger generations learned the careful methods required to make the dish safe and flavorful. In many places, health concerns and changing tastes have pushed chitlins aside, but the tradition still holds a powerful place in memory as a symbol of perseverance and celebration. Egg and potato hash was the meal that turned yesterday's scraps into tonight's feast. It began with leftover boiled or roasted potatoes, chopped into rough cubes and tossed into a skillet slick with grease or butter. The potatoes browned at the edges, crisping beautifully while onions caramelized beside them, adding sweetness and aroma. Then came the eggs, cracked right into the pan, sizzling as they set and pulling everything together. Sometimes, a splash of milk or a handful of cheese found its way in, but even plain, it was hearty enough to feed a crowd. The smell of fried onions and eggs filled the air, waking appetites and hearts alike. Families didn't need meat when they had this. It was rich, flavorful, and deeply satisfying. Each forkful carried warmth, care, and the quiet ingenuity of cooks who refused to waste a thing. Egg and potato hash wasn't just a dish, it was a philosophy. It whispered, "Make do, be proud, feed your own." It proved that even the simplest food, made with love, could taste like triumph. Fish head stew was a dish born out of necessity, yet it carried surprising depth and flavor. Fish heads, often discarded by others, were simmered slowly with onions, potatoes, and rice until they yielded every ounce of richness to the broth. My grandmother insisted the heads made the stew better than fillies, providing body and nourishment that nothing else could. The bones and skin flavored the liquid until it turned hearty and comforting. Potatoes stretched the meal, rice thickened it, and vegetables added substance, turning scraps into a filling supper. The taste was strong, earthy, and unforgettable, reminding everyone that no part of food should go unused. For Black families in the 1960s, fish head stew was a common way to stretch the catch of the day, ensuring nothing went to waste. It became a lesson in thrift and gratitude, proof that survival demanded creativity. Fish head stew was both humble and mighty, sustaining families through lean times with flavor and tradition. Cornbread dressing with giblets was the kind of dish that turned thrift into tradition. It started with the scraps, crumbled cornbread left from the week, mixed with chopped chicken livers, onions, and herbs pulled straight from backyard gardens. The scent of sage and broth filled the home long before the meal was ready, carrying the warmth of something earned, not bought. The giblets, boiled down to tender perfection, gave the dish a richness that spoke of making the most from what little there was. On Christmas Day, this was often the centerpiece, not because it was grand, but because it was shared. Families gathered around small tables and large pots, finding joy in the familiar taste of something humble. Cornbread dressing was not about luxury. It was about love stretched wide enough to feed everyone. Every bite carried memory, patience, and pride, the real flavor of the season. Mustard greens with salt pork were the kind of dish that spoke to both thrift and tradition. Collard greens were loved, but when money was tight, mustard greens filled the pot just as well, with a sharper bite and a quicker cook. My grandmother simmered them slowly with scraps of salt pork, the fat melting into the broth until every leaf carried flavor. The kitchen smelled earthy, smoky, and strong, reminding everyone that even the humblest greens could feel like a feast when seasoned with care. She always said the broth, what some called potlikker, was the best part, soaking it up with cornbread to make sure not a drop was wasted. It was a dish that brought families together around the table, passing bowls and breaking bread even when meat was scarce. Salt pork was cheap because it was mostly fat, but it gave depth to every bite, transforming greens into comfort. In the 1960s, this was not just a side, it was supper, filling bellies after long days of work. Mustard greens with salt pork carried heritage, thrift, and resilience in one simmering pot. Pickled watermelon rind turned summer scraps into something bright and memorable when waste was never an option. Families peeled the green rinds from sweet watermelons, cut them into strips, and simmered them in a brine of vinegar, sugar, and warm spices until the pieces turned translucent and tender. The finished pickles carried a gentle sweetness with a tart kick that balanced fried fish or smoky barbecued pork. Children often helped pack the jars, laughing as the kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon and clove. These jars lined pantry shelves and cooled in cellars, ready to brighten winter meals with a taste of summer. For many households, this thrifty condiment was a sign of careful planning and pride in making every harvest last. Today, few people bother to save the rinds, and the recipe hides in old notebooks and fading memories. Yet those who remember speak of the surprising pleasure of that sweet, sour crunch beside a plate of fried catfish. Salmon croquettes were the breakfast of ingenuity, born from tin cans and imagination. Canned salmon was mixed with onions, cornmeal, and a bit of egg shaped into patties and fried until crisp. The smell filled the house like a promise that the day would be all right. They were crunchy on the outside, tender inside, and full of flavor that reached far beyond their humble ingredients. The sizzle of the skillet was music, the sound of a meal stretching to feed everyone. Eaten with grits, biscuits, or a little mustard on the side, they turned a simple morning into something memorable. These croquettes were survival disguised as comfort food, proof that scarcity never stopped creativity. They were hearty enough for men heading to work and tasty enough to make children smile. The golden crust caught the light just right, shining like victory in the pan. Salmon croquettes were a triumph of spirit and taste over circumstance. Fried bologna steaks were the working family's luxury, served with pride and no apology. Bologna came cheap and lasted long, and when sliced thick and fried in a hot skillet, it became something better than anyone expected. The edges curled and browned as they sizzled, crisping in their own salty fat until the kitchen filled with the smell of smoky comfort. Some families added onions, letting them caramelize right alongside, while others poured milk and flour into the pan to make a rich gravy from the drippings. Served over mashed potatoes or tucked into a sandwich, fried bologna was more than food. It was resourcefulness turned into tradition. Kids loved its crisp edges. Parents loved that it stretched $1 and still filled every belly. For families who worked hard and had little to spare, this meal was both dignity and delight. Every bite was a reminder that care and creativity could turn the simplest things into something worth remembering. Fried bologna wasn't a compromise. It was proof that pride could be pan-fried and served hot, one slice at a time. Vegetable soup with garden leftovers was a dish born from necessity and creativity. My grandmother gathered whatever vegetables were left at the end of the week, beans, carrots, peas, corn, or turnip greens, and simmered them in a pot of broth. Sometimes she added rice, pasta, or even potatoes to bulk it up, creating a soup that stretched far beyond its humble ingredients. Each pot tasted different, depending on what was on hand, but it always felt hearty and comforting. Cornbread was served alongside, crumbled into bowls to soak up every drop of broth. It was a way of cleaning out the fridge without wasting anything, a meal that proved scraps could still sustain. Families in the 1960s relied on dishes like this to carry them through lean weeks, stretching pennies into nourishment. Vegetable soup with garden leftovers was both frugal and flavorful, carrying the ingenuity of women who made sure nothing went to waste. It was survival disguised as comfort, one pot feeding many with warmth, pride, and love. Sweet potato pie with evaporated milk was the crown jewel of every holiday table, made not from luxury but from love and patience. Black mothers in the 1970s knew how to take what little they had and make it taste like a feast. Sweet potatoes were peeled, boiled, and mashed until smooth, then blended with canned evaporated milk, sugar, eggs, and just a whisper of cinnamon and nutmeg. That canned milk was a blessing. Cheap, rich, and shelf-stable, it gave the pie its creamy body when fresh milk was too costly. The scent of nutmeg and baked crust filled the house like warmth made visible, calling kids from every corner to peek at the oven window. These pies were more than dessert. They were tradition, made days in advance so flavors could deepen, often baked in mismatched pans that had seen decades of holidays. Mothers saved their best pie for Christmas Day, setting it proudly beside the tree, or wrapping it for church gatherings. The crust might have been store-bought, but the love was handmade. Every slice tasted like belonging, sweet and steady, with just enough spice to remind you where you came from. No one left the table hungry, and no one forgot that pie. Cabbage and sausage skillet was the kind of dinner that turned struggle into satisfaction. A single head of cabbage, cheap and sturdy, could feed a whole family when paired with a few slices of sausage or hot dogs. Grandmothers fried the sausage first, letting the grease flavor the pan, then tossed in ribbons of cabbage that sizzled and softened. The sound of it frying was enough to make mouths water, a tune of thrift and triumph. The smell filled the house, smoky, savory, and sweet all at once. Potatoes or onions sometimes joined the mix, stretching it further while adding depth. Served hot from the skillet, it was hearty and humble, with each bite carrying flavor far greater than its cost. This meal didn't come from plenty, it came from wisdom, from knowing how to make something out of nearly nothing. Families ate together, full and grateful, proving that good food didn't need much, only love, heat, and a little time. Barbecue pig ears were a dish that showed how deeply rooted thrift and tradition were in Black cooking. Pig ears were among the cheapest cuts, often discarded or sold for pennies at butcher shops. My grandmother cleaned them carefully, simmered them until tender, and then finished them with homemade barbecue sauce that clung to every bite. The texture was chewy but flavorful, and paired with cornbread or greens, it became a meal that carried both satisfaction and culture. Families gathered around plates of pig ears during weekends or special occasions, treating them as a delicacy despite their humble beginnings. The sauce was smoky, tangy, and rich, masking the simplicity of the cut with layers of flavor. Eating barbecue pig ears was about more than just nourishment. It was about making something from nothing, about honoring traditions that valued every part of the animal. In the 1960s, dishes like this kept families connected to heritage and survival alike. Barbecue pig ears turned scraps into a meal that was cheap but never forgotten. Hogmaw and potatoes was a dish that turned thrift into comfort and labor into flavor. Hogmaw, the lining of a pig's stomach, was scrubbed clean, seasoned, and stuffed with diced potatoes, onions, and spices before being boiled to tenderness. The scent filled the house with something hearty and homegrown, proof that nothing from the hog ever went to waste. Families who made it knew that the best meals didn't come from the finest cuts. They came from resourceful hands. The flavor was rich, earthy, and satisfying, a balance between the soft potatoes and the chewy, savory casing. It was the kind of food that stuck with you, not just in the belly, but in memory. Hogmaw and potatoes was about resilience, about stretching what little you had into something that felt whole. It was shared at big tables after church, on holidays, or any day that called for gratitude. To outsiders, it might have seemed humble, but for those who grew up on it, it tasted like home and history wrapped in one. A meal like this didn't just feed the body. It fed the pride of making plenty out of almost nothing.
Which rice dish takes you back to your mother's kitchen? Drop it in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe for more forgotten flavors from Black culinary history.